Scene one, Apple, take one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Borza. Welcome to another episode of Film Notes, the show where I interview people in the industry about the industry and get their notes on what they've learned and how they can share their wisdom and experience with you. I'm excited to reconnect with an old friend from Sydney, Australia today named Yolandi Franken, who is a producer working in the industry. And we're going to dive into what producers do. If you do or don't know, there's lots of different kinds of producers and they all tend to do different types of things. And we're going to find out also how she has produced different things both in film and television. So Yolandi, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so super exciting.
I know we haven't talked in a long time, so we were just catching up a little bit. I think it's been about 10 or so years, and you've had a lot of big things going on. But before we get to what's going on now, I wanted to just go back and ask you, how did you end up getting into the industry? I know some people, it's like a lifelong thing. They've always wanted to be an actor or a writer or something. And other people, they come to it from, they have a whole career beforehand or something. So what got you into working in film and television?
As you say, a lot of people had this key moment of realization. I want to work in the industry. If I watched this movie and then I wanted to become, a director or an actor or something. But I didn't have that moment. I just never had a memory of not wanting to work in the industry. You say even going way back to school, like primary school, all my art projects was always about something like movies. So if I had to write an essay, I was also always writing about movies. So I really don't know where it started, but yeah, it's just been part of me since I have a memory. And so obviously straight out of school, went to film school in South Africa and started working, like learning producing, but also TV presenting. So in South Africa, I was a TV presenter and a host. So yeah, I'm producing. But when I moved to Australia, I had an accent. I couldn't really do, too much hosting on television anymore. And kind of hosts fell off. Like before they were like in between TV shows, they would do an announcement. That's what I did. So there wasn't really much opportunity for hosting for me. So I started to do some acting, which I gave it a shot for a few years, but I'm not really good at it. And I didn't really have a passion enough to improve myself. So I'm just a producer. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really helpful for us to stretch into some of those other roles, and it can be really helpful if we're behind the camera to know what it's like to be in front of camera, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, what was it that brought you, because you mentioned you went to school in South Africa and that's where you're from, and then you went to Australia. So I went to Australia for school, but what brought you to Australia and what kept you there?
Well, just I guess better opportunities, better, safer country, a bigger industry. Yeah.
Now you mentioned diving into some acting and then getting out of it. So how did you end up navigating through some of those things, like I was presenting and I'm not, I was acting, now I'm not, and getting more into producing full time?
So for me, transitioning into producing was a very definite decision. I realized one day I'm going to all these auditions. You have to do a lot of auditions to get like one acting job, especially if you suck like me. So when you spend money on doing training and this and that, and so much wasting of time. And then I didn't have that much time to do producing. And one day I realized, what am I doing? I'm wasting time doing something that I'm not good at, that I'm not really passionate about, while I'm letting go of the things that I really love, which is producing. So I've decided from here on, I'm no longer an actor. I've taken out actor from my bio, and I didn't delete stuff online, but I've, made that clear line. Okay, from here on forward, I'm no longer an actress.
You talked a couple times about passion, and the thing that's so great about the arts is, and especially filmmaking, is it's both a creative thing, whether it's acting or the camera moves or just coming up with the story, but it's also like a science. You have to learn what lighting is, and you have to know all the technical things like which lens, and there's a ton of paperwork and organization, and it's about kind of putting those things together. So how does that work for you? When you talk about passion, like what is the passion that you have for producing?
For me, okay, so I have to say this, I'm not a creative person. I cannot write, I cannot direct. I can critique creative things and I can appreciate creative things, but I have a big passion to make creative things happen. So taking other people's stories and making that a reality for them. Because a lot of people that are creative are not necessarily business savvy or have that, they want to write or they want to direct or they want to act, they don't want to do the rest. Where I want to do all the rest, but I want to do it with in a creative field, I guess. So instead of, producing is, say, for example, close to project management, but I could never work in an accounting company or any other company, actually. It's like an addiction, this industry. So, yeah, I've always just known, got to be creative industry. And, yeah, I want to bring great stories to the screen. I want to entertain people. I want to take people to a different world. And, yeah, facilitating that is quite amazing to me.
And where did you start in producing? Was it indie stuff at film schools? Was it television? Like a lot of these other jobs, whether it's in the industry or outside, there's usually some kind of pecking order. You start off as an assistant or a junior so and so. And as I mentioned at the beginning too, there's lots of different kind of producers. So walk me through a little bit of the history of like how you got that foot in the door, and either worked your way up or decided to move around. I've seen some producers that are very active. They're on set and part of production, and others, like, you never meet them. They're just a name in the call sheet because they're in the office doing all the behind the scene, they're wrangling and organizing, what have you. So talk to me a little bit how you got started, and then also kind of what kind of producer you like to be, or you would consider yourself.
Okay, great. Yeah. So like I said, straight out of school, I went to film school. And the film school I worked at, I went to, had a production house attached to it. So I worked at the production house as a production assistant while I was studying. So that was really great for me because I got my foot in the door on a career level as well. And then in South Africa, there's only one network that controls, there's like SABC 1, 2, 3, and they control all of them, even the radio stations. And I went to work on a project there and ended up staying working there and getting my foot into television in that way. So I started off in television and documentaries. And then moving to Australia, I didn't want to work in television anymore. It was too corporate, too much red tape. It's not at all what I had in mind when I wanted to work in the creative industry. So I decided I'm not going to go back to television, and also not documentaries really, and I'm going to focus on feature films. So of course the journey to that is like a whole mountain to climb. So I started off doing a bunch of short films, getting friends together, begging people to come and help because you don't have any money. So I did like a lot of short films and music videos in between, and some TV commercials in between to pay the bills. And then just, yeah, from there on, I met you guys. I made my first feature with you, Shane. Turbines was my first feature. So that, of course, that was a really great learning experience, and seeing what everyone does in their roles on a bigger set and how it works. And then so fast forward, now I've done 4 feature films. No, 4 feature films. I've done another reality series, TV series, and I did actually do a few more documentaries as well. So yeah, a lot of things have happened, but I am quite hands-on. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a control freak, but I want to know everything that everyone's doing. I want to, make sure everyone has what they need. So for me, when I get a script, I immediately do a breakdown. I know the first ID does a breakdown and all that schedule and whatever, but I like to do it myself in any way, even if they do it. Just for me to really get my head around the project, exactly what props are needed, what can we change in the schedule, that, I want to really understand the project at a deeper level. And then also, I like to talk to all the heads of departments about what they're doing, what gear they're using, like what resources they need and have, because I want to learn from them. For my next production, I know, okay, with this kind of problem are these possible solutions, instead of just going, oh, I don't know what to do. So I think just educating ourselves around the whole production and every role is really important. I do go to set all the time. I am now starting to feel that maybe I want to do that less. I say that now because I've recently come off a production, but I bet you I will feel different again. But even if I work in a production office only, I would probably still go in from time to time and just check in and make sure everyone's happy.
You mentioned turbines, and that was my first feature as well. I had met our mutual friend Igor Brekenback, who there is a interview with him. He was actually the first episode of this show a couple of years ago. This is the third season for people who don't know. And so we had met on kind of like my senior film for film school. And then the end of that year, we ended up doing like 3 features in a row. We shot a feature in Canberra, and then we shot a feature out in Dubbo, and then we did the turbines project. So it was a real trial by fire for me to do kind of like 3 projects in a row. And then I left Australia, and then all my connections were now across the world. So I wanted to ask you about that too, because you talked about being in South Africa and starting production there and being in TV, and then having to restart in a new country, in a new city is difficult anyway, but much less not having those industry connections. So you talked about doing some of the shorter, smaller projects, the music videos, the commercials, what have you. So talk to me about how you were able to kind of build your team or make your connections so that you could facilitate not only having connections so you could get work, but also like knowing who are the people that I want to work with that are good at these various things.
Well, as you say, coming to a different country, and remember in those days they weren't, the internet wasn't, this was 20 years ago, by the way, almost 20 years ago, maybe 16 years ago. So, they weren't like Facebook like we know it now, and people weren't active online. We didn't have Zoom, and bringing over your network and connections was not, wasn't really that easy that time. So I really had to start from scratch. And I just went and looked up different film groups, social groups, and I just joined the groups and I just networked. Every opportunity that I had to attend anything, whether it be networking or a class or anything, I would just be there and network. And so when I did my short films first, I would reach out to those people and say, can you come and help? And, we all work together on, various roles. And yeah, and I guess that's just how I got to know the people in the industry. A lot of them have never continued because, it's a tough industry. A lot of them are still working in it and working on really big things now. So just keep remembering, okay, I loved working with this person. They were really great on this kind of project. So over the years, I've built my team. Some of them, like I said, disappear, and then you meet other people. But I guess what I've learned was that with every project, there's people that you're going to take with you, and there's always going to be a little family that you can take around, and that's important because you get to know how they work, and you can predict sort of certain aspects of the production.
I think it's really important to have that shorthand, so to speak, with people that it can really facilitate, gestures especially when you're on set. Like, you can't necessarily make any noise, but you have to communicate, or like a reaction, or even just remember how we did it on the other thing. They're like, oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly that. But then also there's a lot of difficult personalities in our industry, which I found challenging. And you just don't know until you get on set. So for me, I feel much more comfortable knowing, okay, these people, I know how they work, I know how they think, we get along well, they're not loco. Yeah, that's very important to me, actually.
Wanted to ask you too about, I mean, just living in Australia for like 3 years, they're, English speaking, but the language, sometimes people would say some slang, or they would refer to something I didn't know what they were talking about. And that, to me, like, I did feel a little fish out of water. So did you, either as kind of a foreigner from a different country or as a woman in the industry, feel or ever have to deal with any difficulties beyond just the normal, like you said, like there are some, difficult people in the industry, or even if they're lovely, when you're on day 10 of like 12-hour shoots, like all that niceness can sometimes
Yeah,
grind people, and
yeah.
it can get very difficult even if they started off nice. So have you had to deal with any of that, or have you noticed any changes? Because I definitely saw a lot of changes in LA over the last, 10 or 15 years, from how things like used to be to how things are now, not only because there's younger people in the industry, but also a lot of the social changes that have gone on.
Hmm. Interesting question. I have always had this mind. I've always had this mindset of not realize. I don't know how to put this in a. I don't know how to say this properly, but I'll say it in the best way I can. But this thing about women not having opportunities as much as men, and all those things have not occurred to me until people started talking about it. I never felt, oh, I didn't get this opportunity because I'm a woman, or I'm new to the country, or anything like that. I just always thought I didn't get this opportunity because I wasn't good enough. My work wasn't good enough, or you know. So it was only later on, now that people started talking about the statistics of work equality, that I realized, oh, I don't know if it was, why did I not ever think of it? But it's only realized. Sorry, I've only realized it then, actually. So this is a difficult question for me to answer because I didn't look for those problems before. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it does. And I think that, whether it's the way we look at things or the way we're raised or taught or what have you, sometimes things are very obvious or not to us.
Hmm.
I we were just talking before we started rolling about, I was just doing like this first shoot in a while, and I realized like, oh, there are just certain things that, I'm in a different state. There's like a different kind of culture here. And I had to try to like adapt to like, this is how this set is going to operate. It's
Hmm.
not like, and especially because the last time I did a shoot was before the pandemic. So I had like a gap of several years. So technically, I was talking to the DP because I was hired as the gaffer originally, and he said, "Oh, we just run everything off an app on the phone now." And I was like, "I what?" You
Oh
know?
yeah.
So like that was a huge shift that I had to do, this like learn on the fly adjustment from like the old school way of like when I learned in like 2010, for instance. He's like, "Yeah, we don't do that anymore." But there was also some of the social stuff of like, hey, we're in Texas and there's like a certain, way that we're gonna do like crafty and breaks and stuff because that's
Yeah.
like the Texas way. And I had to come in and say, oh, I have to adjust to the way that the group or the crew or the culture here is. And I remember talking to my wife, because she was part of the production, that some of those things she noticed, but I didn't, or vice versa. And so I think there is a lot of that, like eye of the beholder thing. Like if you don't see it,
Yeah.
it doesn't affect you. If you do see it, then of course you're going to take that into account. But I'm glad to hear that, because it is a hard industry, and sometimes it just comes down to like doing the work, and it is hard work. You have to show up, like you mentioned about the acting. I have a friend who used to say, my job, she's an actor, my job is to go to auditions. Now,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
occasionally I'm rewarded with a gig, but her work ethic was, I'm going to spend all my time looking for opportunities, going in and reading, meeting people, because I won't get the gig unless I do that as much as possible.
Mm.
And I always thought that work ethic really spoke highly. I mean, she's won awards both on stage and on TV. And the reason she's done that is because she was able to get in the room. And it was all that back work, the
Exactly.
non-glamorous part.
Yeah, exactly. It's all, like I said, I started off with short films, no money, and just having the connections. It's always the connections that brings you, because I would always get my next project from someone I met at a previous project. Every single time I was brought on, or a project was pitched to me because of someone I worked with. So I think, especially in our industry, and especially with producing, honestly, I'm not going to lie, maybe 80%, I don't know if I'm even exaggerating, but I would say 80% is networking. Yeah, to get opportunities, you know what I mean? Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
we've
was
been
lucky that in South
Go
Africa,
ahead.
it wasn't that different in South Africa than it was in Australia. With, there was a few terminologies that was different, but everything else was pretty much the same.
Sorry to stop the show, but we've got some bills to pay around here, and to do that, I wanted to point out a couple things I've got on offer at shaneborza.com. As both a master level mental health coach and an award winning filmmaker, I have the experience and expertise to help you go further faster, regardless of whether that is in your production or life. I am psyched to announce all my courses and books have been updated and expanded and are available on both Apple Books and at my shop. Especially wanted to point out my Film Notes book and workbook, where you can learn everything you need to make your film and get it out to the world. If you need help with either your life or film, please reach out. And now, back to the show.
We've been talking about your history and the way you like to work, and there's a lot of good points you brought up, but I wanted to step back and just talk about, like, what does a producer do for a project? And we mentioned there's a lot of different kinds of producers. Some people, they're just like executive producers, they throw money at it, that's it. Other people, they work in the office, they're never on set. Other people, they are on set. But what are the roles and responsibilities, the to-dos? Like, what does a producer produce, so to speak?
Wow, that is a question that is so big to answer. You'll need like a week of discussion, but I'll try and sum it up in categories. The first responsibility would be to get the money for the project, which sucks because you don't get paid until the end. So you've got to do a lot of work, in the beginning to raise the money. Then you have to, depending on who brings you the project, is it the writer, director, blah, blah, blah. So you have to then hire or not a director, heads of departments, the crew. Normally, sometimes the crew will pick the heads of departments will pick their own crew, but I like to also, look at people I've worked with and have a discussion with the heads of departments. You work on development, you get the distributor, the sales agent, getting your pitch package really, really well sorted, attaching the actors. You can start with the biggest name actors, which will hopefully sell the film. So once you've got your heads of departments, your actors, your director, your sales agent, distribution, and money, then you can start making the film. So then it's coordinating every department. What do they need to execute the movie? What resources do they need? How do they communicate with each other? So just overseeing the project, pretty much project management, making sure everyone's running on time and to budget specifically. And yeah, and then just managing everyone's expectations on set and in post-production, and then working with the distributors on the release as well and selling it. Marketing, a lot of marketing. As an indie producer, there's not always that much money. You're not going to go millions of dollars for marketing like if you were at a studio. So I believe you have to do a lot of the work yourself, a lot of the grunt work of going to community, like getting the community involved, getting influencers into your project. Working on social media together with your distributor is really important.
In both in indie film, but even just in film in general, or any kind of project, like you mentioned at the beginning, music videos or short films or documentaries or commercials, it's reminding ourselves that there's multiple levels and layers to these projects. There's pre-production, and we need to pay for the gas and the parking and the coffee and finding an office space and a rehearsal space and all that stuff. You haven't even necessarily hired all the crew or any of the crew yet. There's paying for the locations and all the production stuff, getting the equipment, the props, the heads of departments, all the things. But then there's all the post and the editing and the sound and the music rights. And then there's the marketing and there's the release, and it's paying for film festival submissions. It's paying for tickets or to get to the event or whatever it is. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And I think it's really important to have both a good AD who coordinates all the departments on set, but also having a really good producer to coordinate all that stuff, like start to finish. I did one live stage production when I was in Sydney, and it was very educational for me to see the parallel and say like, oh, you have to find like, where's the stage that we're going to put this on at? How long is the run going to be? How are we going to promote the show? Is the theater going to do that? Are we going to do that? Or is there some, how do we get the butts in the seats, so to speak?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that just goes on to any kind of project. You're an art gallery. Who's the artist? How are we going to get people to know? Yeah. So the producer mindset is so valuable. And I was laughing to myself earlier when he said, like, I'm not a creative person. Those are the best producers. We need people who understand organization and structure and all of that stuff. So thank God for you doing that kind of work. I did want to pivot though, because one of the other big things we talked about was how you have a 2-year-old now. And that's another thing that is very difficult for people to coordinate, whether it's moving, having a partner, buying a house, having children, whatever it might be. So talk to me a little bit about how things, whether it's perspective or logistics or anything, have or haven't changed since before you had your daughter to now, and also what you might see in the future.
Great. Yes. So I probably still am, but I was a workaholic. I would work since I started my career 7 days a week, pretty much 24/7, nonstop. I was obsessed with making movies and I didn't care about anything else, but I also wanted to be a mom. And when I eventually had my baby, I'm like, after 3 months, I'm going to go back to work and that's going to be it. And she's going to go to daycare or something. No, that didn't happen because I absolutely fell in love with being a mom and I fell in love with my baby. And then I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. And as she's still not in daycare or anything, I'm still looking after her at almost 2 years. And I decided, why do I have to choose between having a career and having a family? Men don't have to do that. Or, why does it have to be a choice? And I've decided I'm going to make a decision to change it, at least for myself. So I am taking her to all my meetings. I am taking her everywhere I go. If I have even Zoom meetings, I would bring her or she would play behind me. And I even took her to set in my last feature film. She went with me every single day and she was wonderful. She was great. But I have to say that I do have a really easy child. So that might be a trick as well. But yeah, so I took her to set every day. And I am not going to choose between being a great mom and being a producer. And that's how I'm doing it.
Well, I mean, that's tremendous, first of all. And I think it's really important for people to hear that there are options.
But it's also made me, sorry, Shane, it's made me also aware of other people being in that situation where it never really occurred to me before. So now moving forward, and since my last feature, I really want to give everyone that opportunity. Like, I would love to have a budget every time from now on in my films for a daycare, for people who, especially people with little kids, babies or mums who want to come back to work, but they can't because they got to breastfeed every 2 hours. Have a place where someone can come with a babysitter, or we provide babysitters, or they can bring someone and they can pop out every 2 hours and go and breastfeed or bring their kids or whatever. And just, what I've also done in my last feature is making sure that we don't go over 10 hours, because in indie films sometimes you go a lot, you shoot a lot of hours, so making sure it never goes over 10 hours. And we had 5 weeks 4 days instead of 4 weeks 5 days, just to create a little bit more work-life balance for people. So I think it's changed my perspective of the whole, how are we making films and why are we doing it the way we're doing it. And I have to say that I thought maybe we would lose some money because it's 5 weeks now instead of 4, but it didn't. Our crew was much more motivated. They had a lot of energy. We didn't have that sluggish feeling at the end of the day or the end of the week. And it's actually beneficial for the production, I've realized. So it's not just for my selfish reasons, it's also now for professional reasons.
And that's a great insight. I'm so glad that you're doing that. For those who don't know, I have been a professional coach for many years. And a couple of the things that I talk about with a lot of the people who I see is moving from these ors where we feel like, well, is it family or career? Is it my kids or my job? To figuring out, well, how can you have more and the idea of, like you said, like, hey, well, we're going to switch some of this stuff around and see if we can do it in a different way that might be better. Testing those systems. Say, hey, what if we did, 5 4s instead of 4 5s? And it's delightful to see. Sometimes we might want to try things, but we're kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work. So it's great to hear that. And also just to represent, like you mentioned, or to go back, we were talking about how sometimes like we don't notice things or we don't see them, so therefore we don't affect. Like I never would have thought until you just mentioned, like, oh, right, like women might need a break to breastfeed or take care of their child, or at least want to go check in and be like, hey, how's the baby doing at the house or whatever. So it's that type of perception to say, I've noticed this thing, so let me create an environment where we can all be mindful of this. And that can be more inclusive, but also just to address that larger structure. Like it is very common to fall into, like I said at the beginning, like, well, if it's a 20-hour day, oh, well, that's production. And instead saying, let's make this better. Let's make it more sustainable. And like you said about your crew, it is really important when people are doing these things full time. I know so many people who they get ground out after 5 or 10 years and they don't do it anymore. And they are sometimes the best people, but it's just not sustainable for them. So I'm really glad that you are able to like speak up, and especially as a producer who's like running productions for people and this is kind of a question I want to ask you though, is how are you finding bringing some of these things up? Is this just a decision that you're like, here's what we're going to do? Or is this some kind of a negotiation you're finding like with the people who are running the projects? How are you finding being able to put some of these things into place, or at least have discussions about them?
Let me just mention one thing before I answer that, is that the other thing we did was job sharing. So like I said, women who maybe not take the job, can't take the job because they've got to look after their babies. Some might be able to look after their kids for half a day. So having job sharing and taking that pressure off one person, whether it be like just for the sake of their mental health, because they want to look after their kids for whatever reason, but having job sharing, I think, was a big thing as well. When we started the production and we decided we're going to do things like this, we did speak to the crew and say, we want to do this. This is not conventional. What do you think? How would you feel about it? And everyone loved it. Everyone loved it. It was such a big winner. And actually, some of the people came on board because of that, which I found so surprising. Because I thought people were going, oh, this is not how it's done. Blah, blah, blah. This is not how it works. But everyone was so relieved for just the change and the breath of fresh air. Yeah. And for me, because I'm a producer, I can just say, this is how we're going to do it. Well, of course, you have to consult the people that you work with, but ultimately, if everyone's happy, then yeah, that's how we're going to do it.
Well, I'm so glad that you spoke up. Any change that happens because somebody notices something and says, hey, let's see if we can find a better way to do it. And they don't just accept, well, this is the way it is. So I'm so glad that you not only saw the successes there, but kind of dared to kind of raise your hand and go, hey, what if we did it a different way? And to find out like, oh, this way is actually better. These ripple effects sometimes take a while, but hopefully, this is another big thing. And I was so happy to have experienced film school and production and stunts and learning all this stuff overseas, because the way that we do it outside of like the Hollywood system is very different. And I've talked to a lot of people who work in Europe, and it's very much like, this is the job. It's not the life. And we're going to come to work every day and do our best, but we're not going to do this like hard turnovers and what have you, because that isn't sustainable. And there are more kind of rules and regulations about that in some places. I listen to a bunch of industry podcasts, but there's one called How Not to Make a Movie podcast by the guys who did a bunch of the HBO like horror shows back in the day, like the Freddy Krueger shows and things like that. And they said they were shocked when they went to Shepperton Studios in England to film something, because, and this is something I experienced when I was in Australia, which is why I'm bringing it up, is like, oh, morning and afternoon tea, these are mandatory breaks that we have to have on our day for the crew. And these
You don't have that?
From England, and they were to England from the US. No, we don't have that. It's just, it doesn't matter when you start. Lunch is 6 hours after call. So you could start at 6 a.m. or you could start at 10 a.m. Lunch is 6 hours from call. And if you are going to have a long day, then you have a second meal. And there's a penalty for that. But there's no, like, 2 hours in or 3 hours in, there's a 20-minute break for tea or what have you. And they were just like losing their minds. And basically the crew walked, and the producers had to be like, oh, right, we're not in America. This is the way the system is. And then they said after a month or so, they were like, actually, this is kind of great. It gives us a chance to have everybody have a rest and come back. If anybody had a fight or they're upset, like, they get to calm down. Yeah. And it really helps them have a better day, because there are more of these little resets instead of just people building up and getting tired and hungry and angry. And at the end of the day, they blow up. And so finding, I think, other ways to do that can be really helpful. And so one of the things that I do on my stuff is I remember, like, we're not in Australia, we don't have tea time, but let's everybody have maybe a mid-morning and mid-afternoon coffee break or a snack break or something. It also gives us a chance to have, like, the production team, like, have a little huddle. Be like, hey, everybody grab something. We're going to sit down the back for 15 minutes and see where we're at.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that as well. I was going to also say that, because in that tiny break, if you might have had a problem, that you could now quickly step, because when you're filming, you're like on the go, but having that little break, you step out of it and you can actually assess things a little bit clearer. So you might have something that you've been dealing with, and you can just get that clarity in that little break. But also, I don't think you lose that much time, because our lunch break would probably be shorter than yours. We would have like a half an hour lunch and then 2 15-minute teas. So it's not really costing the production anything except something good mental health.
Now, before we run out of time here, I did want to ask you, with all of this experience and having worked in all these different aspects, what are the biggest film notes you might have, either as a producer that you might want to share with other people, but also in terms of, what are some notes for people who might want to work with someone like you that hasn't ever hired a producer before, or hasn't had like an official producer? They're like producing their own things, for instance. What might be your notes for how to reach out to someone like you, work with someone like you, find someone like you?
To be a producer, some tips that I have would just be getting out there and networking. Like I said before, it's all about relationships. So just maybe having a list of the people that you think you want to meet, or the people that you want to learn from, and finding ways to connect with them, even if you have to reach out. I know producers are not always easy to just get a coffee with because they're busy, but if you can find a way or an opportunity to connect with them, that would be great. Having a mentor, so wonderful, or a few mentors. I have a few people that is quite high up in the industry. If I come across a problem that I don't know how to solve, or something new that's a new aspect to the production that I never had to deal with, I can just reach out to them and say, hey, have you come across this before? And they give me great advice. So just that. And then also to know the industry, because you can make the product, but if you don't know where it's going to sell, or what the landscape is looking like, or what our audience is looking for at this moment, what our sales agents and distributors looking at right now, you're not going to be able to get your project out there. So knowing what the industry is all about, and knowing how it's changing constantly, so having to stay up to date all the time is really important. And then if you're a writer or director or the project that wants to find a producer, again, just reach out. I think if you have IMDb Pro, normally the contact details would be on there, or even on social media. But I would I would say make sure that you go there with a project that you can show with a really good pitch deck, because like for me, I get pitched projects every week, and I say I don't even look at in 90% of them at all, unless there's something that really jumps out at me. I'm like, oh, this log line sounds, what is this? I need to know more. Or they've got a great actor attached, or some hook in the project. Those are the ones that for me that I would look at, because like I said, this you can't. If I have to read everyone's projects, I will have no time to do anything else. So I think just, and I guess that applies to finding any kind of attachment to your project, just having that hook. Yeah. Or if you go to networking events or markets, festivals, that's a good place to meet people as well. I guess because when you meet someone as a producer, when you meet someone at a market or a festival, you know that they're serious about what they're doing, and they're not just some random guy who wrote something and doesn't have any idea. I mean, everyone needs to start somewhere, but for me, having to pick projects, that's helpful. Yeah. And if you haven't done anything before, I would suggest get a camera, get some people together, put something together so you have some experience. So when you do approach producers, they can, they know that you understand the industry a little bit.
Where can people see either some of your work or connect with you, whether it's websites, anything that might be on a streaming platform somewhere, or to follow you on social media to see more about you and what you're doing?
My Facebook and my Instagram and my LinkedIn is just my name, Yolandi Franken. And for my work you can find on most streaming platforms. I've got Streets of Color that was just released in Australia, and we've just signed our US distributor as well. So I don't have release details for that yet, but I think by the time this goes live, I might have it. So maybe I can send it to you, and then you can put it in your notes. And then Common and Blue Day, we finish in post-production now, so we would love to grow our audience a little bit. So if you Common and Blue Day, I'll send you also the name, Shane. If you want to follow it, it will be released later in the year, and we'd love to grow our audience and grow our followers before then, so we can get the message to you about what our film is all about.
And I know I got some media from you on some of the projects. So if you're watching the show, you'll see some of that come up. And of course, I'll put all the links either on the screen or in the show notes so people can easily connect. Because I want to not only really showcase the people who are on the show, but really help people have those connections to either be inspired by something they saw so that they can then make something, or want to connect with someone because they saw something they did. So thank you for all that. Anything else that you'd like to share on any lessons or resources before we move to wrap up here?
Well, I've already shared my lessons. Resources, I mean, there's so many wonderful books out there, and I don't even know which ones to mention. I can't even think of one now, but yeah, watch a lot of movies, learn from what is current. What do people want?
So thanks so much for being here. It was great for me to learn a little bit more about like your background, for instance, because I didn't know that, even though I know you, but also to catch up because it has been a while. As I mentioned, for people who aren't aware, if you're just listening to the podcast, this is a visual show you can watch on YouTube. So you can see the guest, and you can, as I mentioned, see some of the posters and things that will be in the edit. If it's easier for you to listen to a podcast, it's available on all the streaming platforms. Regardless of how you're getting the show, please share it and like and subscribe. And we'll see you next month with another episode.
Thank you. It was lovely to see you, Shane, and lovely to be here with all of you guys.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the show, please click on the link below. You can also contact me at my website if you have any questions about filmmaking or anything else. Off to the side, you'll see a couple of my books, Film Notes and the Film Notes Workbook. I encourage you to check those out if you'd like to learn more about filmmaking. See you in the next episode.
Scene 1, Apple, take 1.